everyone. Welcome. Thank you so kindly for joining us. My name is Car Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. I'm very glad to have you here. And tonight I'm very happy to welcome our authors in order, as you see them here. Tierney, Anna B. Moore, and JJ Elliott. Let's give a hand for all three of them. I'm very excited to have you three here celebrating their latest releases. This is doesn't happen all that often at Green Apple. We get to have three people working in conjunction and talking about their work together, and we get to hear from all of you, so that is exciting. I have very brief business, the briefest of business today. The restroom, should you need it, is behind this curtain. It is available after the event, not during the event, for obvious reasons. So if you need to know how to get there, do ask me and I will gladly help you. We do have books available from all three of our authors at the front register. Folks joining us online, I will link to those books in the chat. And folks joining us live, thank you so kindly. I think you already bought books, which is very nice of you. We always appreciate that. So we're going to hear a little bit from the work of each of the writers joining us. Then I believe you folks are going to talk to one another about that work, or we'll play it by ear. We'll see what they do. They're free agents. They can do what they want. But we'll see. We're in for a real treat this evening. And I am just going to give you a little bit of biographical information about each of our authors joining us before I let them take it away. First, JJ Elliott is a professional copywriter with a degree in English from UCLA. A native of Northern California, she now lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her husband and 2 teenage children. There Are No Rules for This is her first novel. Let's give one more hand for JJ Elliott. Next, Anna B. Moore has published creative nonfiction, essays, and short fiction in a variety of literary journals and magazines, including American Scholar, Shenandoah, and Black Warrior Review, among others. She lives with her family, 2 cats and 2 dogs, in Northern California, where she teaches writing and literature at Chico State. Her book, Don't Pity the Desperate, is part of the reason we are here tonight. Let's give another hand for Anna B. Moore. And last but most certainly not least, Tierney is the author of The Poet's Garage and the novels Lucky Ride and The Bridge on Beer River. His poems and stories recently appeared in the Bellevue Literary Review, Remington Review, Read Magazine, and other publications. He lives in Oakland, California, with his family, including 2 fluffy cats and an enthusiastic golden retriever, as if there's another kind. And his latest book, Why Trees Stay Outside, is also part of the reason we're here tonight. Let's give one more hand for JJ. And you can take it away. Yay.
That makes me realize I need to probably put like some actual writing things in my bio, because I forgot to do that. But hi, thank you guys so much for being here. This is as she said, my first novel, and it is about 4 best friends in midlife who are kind of each other's family outside of family, and one very unexpectedly dies by suicide, and the rest of them, as part of their grieving process, decide to hold their own funerals while they're still alive. So I'm going to read to you the first, it's really just 2 pages, and then I have another piece I can read, and we can just go from there. But this will introduce you to the characters. And, well, you'll see. Okay. On who first befriended Feeney Sims, none of us agree. I am sure I met her first, when our daughters were in preschool together. Lydia is positive they met at a yoga class, which is silly because I've never known Feeney to wear pants without a real waistband. Max says her ex-boyfriend and Feeney's husband played softball in the same Rotary team, and they met in the bleachers, each toting matching thermos bottles full of Chardonnay, which is certainly probable. However it happened, what we all agree upon is that a little over a decade ago, within a few short months, our long impenetrable trio became a foursome. The decision was both unanimous and never discussed. Lydia, Max, and I had known each other since high school, and we have the embarrassing photos to prove it. There's me, curvy when no one else was, the body of a woman with the soul of a tomboy. There's Max, loud and funny and raspy and biting, and prone to soul-crushing bouts of depression, even then. There's Liddy, bohemian before it was hip, and by the time it was, she couldn't quite make it cool. Needless to say, we weren't whooping it up every Saturday night as teenagers, something we've spent many, many years making up for. I often wonder what brought Max, Liddy, and me together all those years ago. Unlike most young female friendships that flourish on mutual interests and common ground, ours seemed rooted in all the things that made us different. Maybe it was the simple fact that none of us slipped easily into those cliched groups, jocks, preps, nerds, cheerleaders. We were just us in a world where everyone seemed to be someone else. Our trifecta wasn't always seamless, however. There were times when we split up and paired off and battled to the point of being sure the damage was irreparable, but it somehow never was. Not even when Liddy slept with Max's boyfriend of 4 years, or when Max, in one of her more violent episodes, threatened to kill us both with a Girl Scout penknife. Or when I dated a woman briefly just after college and Liddy accidentally told my old school dad, who was under the impression that we were roommates. Feeney was so instantly right in our group that it made us feel like we were all wrong before her arrival, a car that had been limping along with 3 wheels. She filled in the gaps, softened the edges, made us all a little brighter and better. But that's not to say she was without her quirks. And in fact, sometimes it seemed she was all quirk, like the fact that she set all her clocks in her house to different times. Only she knew at any given hour which clock told the correct time, a fact that was endearing and annoying. Plenty of times I'd say, "Oh, for Christ's sake, Feeney, what time is it?" To which she'd just smile and respond, "What's the rush, Allie?" I learned to wear a watch. And while we can't know for certain how she entered our group, none of us will ever forget how she left. A phone call in the middle of a mid-July night from her husband. She was gone. She'd done it with pills. None of us saw it coming. And I'm just going to do one more this is Allie, who's the narrator, dealing with her grief. Ever since Feeney died, it's been all motion and emotion. I feel like I've been beaten up from the inside out. Something you don't know about grief until you're smack in the middle of it is, it's really fucking physical. This is not, I feel sad. This is, I feel like I can't breathe properly, like someone ratcheted my ribs in by several inches. My eyes are so dry, I can feel them move in their sockets, and then they burn until they're crying, and then they swell almost shut. I'm exhausted all day, but can't sleep at night, so my bed is both a blessing and a curse. I have pain in parts of my body that were just words before. Sternum, cranium, brow bone. After crying, my body hurts in the same way it did that one time I had food poisoning. I turn on my side and spend several minutes staring out the window. A white butterfly flits by, a hummingbird drops down into the trumpet of a lily. The branches of our oak tree lift and fall to the silent cadence of the wind, while a mourning dove call echoes in the background. Nothing I haven't seen and heard 100 times before, but today I sense Feeney in it all. She is the fragile, improbable beauty of butterfly wings. She is the daring flash of red on the breast of the hummingbird. She is the trusting, open face of the lily. She is the majesty of the tree, arms held wide, hair dancing in the breeze. She is the peace of the dove while I am in mourning. I don't feel less grief, but my sadness has moved from a black shard in my gut to something that is as much a part of me as my breath and blood. It is me. It is in me, as is Feeney. Okay. It's not all super sad, I promise.
Okay. Hi, everybody. This is my first novel as well. Don't Pity the Desperate. I'm going to read for a little less time, I think. Just because that feels a little bit better. Just going to read a few sections from the very beginning of the book. I honestly don't know. I don't think you need to really know anything except maybe it's set in the 1980s. And everybody's a mess, but that's no surprise. So anyway, okay. So this is chapter 1, Meaningful Things. Myra would tell the community about the cat. It was the first thing she remembered anyway, a black blob moving across the gravel road. She saw it in a blink, and then it was under the Nova's wheel. "You can go faster than that," Chad had kept saying, his voice low and lovely from the back seat. He'd said he was too tired from baseball practice to sit up front with her. She knew she shouldn't accept this, but did anyway, and felt herself relinquishing something, giving up and in. She could see in the rear view his soft chin, his brown curls. She wanted to touch his face, run her fingers along the sides of his nose, across his cheekbones. She was finally alone with him, with Chad Norris, with nobody else. She popped open the can of Budweiser he handed her and put it between her legs and pushed the clutch in and shifted the Nova to third and zoomed up the tiny hill at 40 miles per hour, dust swirling up from the gravel. "Right on, Myra," Chad called. Myra smiled and flipped her hair back, then saw the cat and felt the bump. "Oh my God," she said. She stopped the car. "Was that a cat?" "Oh well," Chad said. "What if it's still alive?" Myra shifted into reverse. "What are you doing?" Chad asked. "Going back. I mean with that." He pointed to the gear shift, a lever on the steering column. "This is a really old Nova from the 70s. You shift on the steering column." "No way." "Yep, 3 on the tree." Chad laughed. She had made him laugh, and opened another Budweiser. After Myra had picked him up from baseball practice, he asked her to stop at the AM/PM on Highway 6 so he could buy beer. He knew the checker, he said. Myra watched him walk inside and left the engine running because if she turned it off, it might not start again, and this was embarrassing and stupid, and Myra would do nothing to interfere with the progression of this night. "You killed it. Don't worry," he said. "Don't go back." "What if it's crying by the side of the road? Did you feel that bump? It's dead." He leaned back in the muck of her father's junk in the back seat. "I'm going back." "What are you going to do if it's almost dead? Kill it?" "I don't know." The Nova's engine rumbled. "It runs," her father said. "That's all a car needs to do." You'd think Myra might be embarrassed by such a car, but everyone thought it was funny. It made them all recognize her and know who she was. "There's more beer at my house," Chad said. "Let's go." She had been dreaming about Chad for weeks, the new boy who had moved to Iowa City from Solon and become her partner in advanced biology and a figure of worship in 2 of her other classes. Chad eased her ache for Mark, who, since dumping her for being psycho, no longer went to her locker between classes or called her every night or ever. When she did see him, Myra stared while he pretended she was not there, that they had never dated, that she had never been his escort during the homecoming king and queen nomination ceremony, that he had never told her he loved her in the front seat of his Trans Am, the night soft all around them while they listened to every breath you take, that he had never come while they humped on his basement sofa, that he had never brought her a rose. But now Myra ached for Chad, his body and his eyes, but mostly for his hands touching her face, her breasts, her hips, her back, herself, and her desires that were all so overwhelming and limitless that Myra was left ashamed. "We could go to One Tree and drink some beer," he said. "It's over the hill." Myra made sure Chad wasn't watching and twirled a few strands of hair from her scalp at the base of her neck, then yanked. She brushed the ends against her collarbone, a whisper on her skin. She shifted to drive. They hadn't even made out at One Tree, a raised concrete slab set back from the road beneath a giant weeping willow that hung low to the ground. The slab was cool through Myra's jeans, cows mooed in the distance. Silhouettes of houses or barns or whatever other buildings were out here dotted the horizon, which she could see in the lights from Iowa City. "It's so quiet," Myra had said. "Those trees in the distance, were they maple trees? Weren't there a lot of maple trees out in the country? Their leaves were bigger than giant hands and pointed, but these were the only facts she knew about them. Most trees Myra did not recognize. She knew the names of almost nothing in the biological world, even though she had always tried to learn because flowers, trees, shrubs, leaves, and grasses, knowing what they were and where they were and how they changed as they grew, was key to something important about existence. But still, she could never retain the information, even when she designed her own quizzes. She had failed every one of them, and so failed at being who she wanted to be, and she felt this failure all the time. "Yep," Chad said. Myra dangled her feet, opened another beer, lit a cigarette, but she was careful not to move much or talk much so nothing could get ruined. She would be quiet, nice, smiley, sweet. She waited to see what he would want, crossing her toes instead of her fingers, She didn't believe in God, but she started to pray. She had never felt so powerless. This was the night she had to tell them about. She knew that most of the community's responses would be gentle. Glad you're here. Thanks for sharing. If someone was in denial, the responses were a little harsher, but grounded in concern. I'm scared for you, man. Myra's primary counselor was named Rachel, and in small group therapy every morning and afternoon, Rachel let the group say anything they wanted to whoever was sharing. That's bullshit. I think you're lying. Get honest. I can't believe this crap. Rachel never smiled or showed affection. Neither did Russell Dean, the other counselor. Did they like her or hate her? Did they approve or disapprove? Did they think she was smart or stupid? And why did she care? Why did she always have to care so much about what everyone thought? Because it mattered, that's why. And it wasn't depression, and it wasn't a disorder, just because you wanted everyone to love you and wanted to make sure they did, because if everyone did love you and you knew it, wouldn't you be confident and happy for the rest of your life, no matter what? Wouldn't panic disappear? Wouldn't Myra be able to say what she wanted and learn what was important and understand everything? Wouldn't she be brave enough to be herself?
That's great. I'm going to start with the title poem for my new book, Why Trees Stay Outside. And I credit our son for the title when he was very small. And I want to thank you all for coming, and thank you so much, Carr and Green Apple Books. I really enjoyed hearing you, Anna, and JJ. Why trees stay outside? Why do trees stay outside? My son asks in the rearview mirror, his car seat centered behind me. He worries about the soaking rain, the trees getting wet. I could tell him the old fable, the night the redwoods came to dinner and grew too tall to leave. Or I could tell him the truth, how the trees are inside now. We live in their house, their roots clasped in rings around us like praying hands. They watch, wondering why we neglect the pain of mowed grass, the desperation of deer and fawn sprinting for shelter, the cold stars peering through boughs of live oak, the promise of blooming moss. I might echo his teachers, say we are one with nature. The trees and rocks love us. They want to be left outside. The easy answer he expects. We climb a ridge as the rain clears, sifting soot from the air. Across the bay, the Farallon Islands punch through the fog like knuckles. So this is a poem about the James Webb Telescope. And one of the things I find really fascinating is that we're looking back in time, which is, it's not only distance, it's also time. And I got the title from a newspaper article, but of course, all I really kept was the title. The James Webb Telescope detects a heartbeat. They say the pulses come from a distant galaxy, an infant cluster in the first moment of birth. But I wonder if the heartbeat is yours, there in your nebula of blood and gas, mindlessly chewing the corners of your blanket with toothless gums, your eyes still shut to screaming light. The weave of distance and time, where you will always be our first child, the edge of our farthest vision. We squint in every spectrum just to see you the way you are, though we know it's the way you were, what you might have been. Larger than we can imagine, and farther than any lost prayer, your growth beyond our lifespan. What do you see when you look our way? Are we even there, or are we infants like you? So I haven't read this poem, this next poem publicly before, but after reading your chapter and everything, I decided to include this. It's called Letter from Home. You stopped being the person he knew and became a pickup truck with bad springs. The spaces you left fill the rusted bed, suck you backward, grind like loose teeth when you accelerate, reset your iPhone, username, passwords. Maybe you no longer feel surrounded, whoever you are now. You left before the posse converged, too few to make a difference anyway. Your list of conditions he never understood, and his as well. He will never admit he circles his own highway, searching for you, the scent of your exhaust, the way your voice rises on tiptoes, the twist of your chin and shoulder when you make a point, punching air. He speaks in past tense, broken vase, shovel gouge and sheetrock, your room untouched, as if you were already dead, the ghostly pain of his silent plea. So this next poem, I also thought I'd read because we're talking a little bit about mental illness and psychotherapy and so forth. This is called Psychotherapy After Dinner.
Oh, I love that one so much. So glad you read it. Yeah.
So there is a trigger alert here. If you're put off by human dissection, you just remember it's a metaphor, and it's really
not what I thought you were going to
really.
say.
That was very unusual.
But it's really a love poem. Psychotherapy After Dinner. When she unzips her sweater, her lungs spill to the floor. Still humming the soundtrack of our dinner conversation, our sticky choice of dessert, how we tasted the pollen and honey, the way she knitted the carnation on her pocket, a finer yarn tacking the blossoms like the veins connecting her stomach as it slides out between the flaps of her jeans. Then the long trails of intestines, silvery serpents smelling of souls, the salmon and wild rice, the wine. I worry about her gentle heart, whether it can take the pressure. The jarring fall to hardwood, but it purrs between her womb and the fertile lobes of her brain. Her long legs and slender arms detach and curl around her organs, and her ribs pull away like butterflies, until only her spine stands wavering, an empty hanger bent straight with nothing left to stretch, collapsing beside her shoes. From her warm pile of blood and flesh, I feel her fingertips emerge, crawling up my ankles, past my waist, to my own peeling hand, helping me unbutton my shirt. And just one more short poem. This poem is called Again, the Supermoon. Nights when the moon is close, tides of blood rush through my body, draw me toward the shore of clouds as you try to pull me back. I hear the Bowie in my ears, the bells that think they know me, has seen me before, the same cliff, same alarm. I should know its direction, but I am lost, craving the first snow, the humidity colder than frost, the silent time alone. Leave the door open for me. Thank you.
Beautiful language.
Thanks.
Okay.
I know.
All right. So, what do y'all want to talk about?
When we talked, we had a Zoom call and we talked about how we were trying to kind of like talk about themes, and we were saying all of us are kind of trying to like muddle through difficult times, and they're different, difficult times, but I think that that's something that we all have in common. And I guess I'd like to ask you guys if you've always written to like deal with issues and grief, or I mean, has that always been an outlet?
Do you want to begin? I know you do.
I could.
I'm sure that you do. Confident in that.
Well, I kind of write, from the things that are around me, and so this particular book, I wrote a lot of these poems during in the last 5 years during the pandemic. We had a lot of social justice issues, we've had political issues, we've had environmental issues, and I think a lot of the voices in these poems are trying to articulate, those issues and trying to find some way forward. And so I think in this book in particular, it's kind of about relationships and often broken relationships and trying to make sense of them. But I try to also have a little bit of humor and so forth. But I think we are somewhat in trying times, and I think we're all in a way trying to figure out how to deal with the things around us. And so I guess I'm kind of feeling that also.
Thank you. I guess it's funny. I still have journals. I have always written. I wrote, like long short stories with my little 7-year-old friends, and a woman was always kidnapped and then always escaped. That's pretty much what happened. And
I love your book.
oh my god, how hilarious! There's no escape for Myra. No. She's done for it. But I do have a lot of the journals that I kept when I was in high school, and I don't even know why I have them, because the few times in the last 35, 40 years I've tried to look at them, it's just totally painful. And I don't know if looking back on that and trying to remember the teen that I was, which is what what writers do and what I did in this book to try to just remember the teen that I was. I don't know that it helped for me to put all my for me to put all my pain into words. I don't know that it helped me. And so to this day, I just, I'm not interested in keeping a journal. I wish that I would, like just an itty bitty daily journal to say, did this, went here, did this. That would be great, but I have yet to do that. But I have found over the years of being a writer that when I write autobiographically or semi-autobiographically, which is like most of the time, but when I write it, as fiction, make stuff up, shape it, mold it, it like helps me personally. I don't know if that's why I do it, but I remember I noticed it the first time when I was in college and I was writing some creative nonfiction. And I zoomed in on this event in my life and I wrote about it and I was like, oh my God, I'm such a mess. Now I know why. I get it. I understand what happened. And it was because I applied like writerly stuff to the thing. And that gave me some perspective and some relief. So in that way, I think it helps me get through. But I didn't know that for a long time, that it was helping me in that way until that time in college. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been a writer my whole career, but this is the first time I've written fiction. I'm a copywriter in marketing, and so I've written and written. I used to love to write poetry when I was younger and in college, and so that's just my writing life. And then as a teenager, my mother died by suicide, and I then went on to work on the hotlines for a few years in LA. So I know a lot about the subject, and I feel like it's handled really inauthentically a lot of the time in both fiction and on screen, and it always bothers me. In fact, I wrote an essay for Lit Head magazine that the title is "Murder is a Plot Point, Suicide Isn't," because it's often treated like one, and it just makes me mad. Anyway, and then I was sitting at my desk one day, and the whole idea for this book, like the characters and everything, just like came in like a download. And so I was like, oh, I guess I'm just gonna try to write a book, but that was like 8 years ago. But it did, kind of to your point, writing about a friend of a suicide was really healing for me as the daughter of one, because it's a much more compassionate lens. It's not like it would, you still have abandonment, you still have guilt, you still have anger, you still, because they feel all those things. But there's just not that mother wound, you know, that like has, you know, taken a lot of therapy, but I've done it. So that was really healing for me, and I think I didn't set out to do that, and I wonder if like that feels like you a little bit too. Like you didn't set out to have that empathy for yourself, or you didn't set out maybe to like grapple with some of the stuff you do in your poems, but then you get to the other side of it, and you're like, oh, actually that helped a little bit, you know?
Yeah, yeah. 100%. I felt that way in particular with this book because Myra's in she's in an inpatient rehab in a hospital basically for 2 months, and I felt that in particular when I was writing about the counselors there, who like, you know, I mean, who I suddenly understood had terrible training, were poorly paid, you know. And that's
Have their own stuff.
Exactly, and that's one of the reasons that, like, they made such terrible decisions, you know, in here, and one of the reasons that they seem so wrong, and it has made me think a couple of times about going back to this and making it a much bigger book, with, you know, kind of a collage, that's not inappropriate, with the omniscient point of view, different characters, because I remember I got a question once that just said, why are the counselors so, like, they're, you know, I don't understand why they're doing this, and I realized that the answer to that question was not in the book. And so I thought, oh, I should make this into a more epic story of this microcosm of everybody who's just doing the best they can with what they know.
Or maybe it's a series, maybe it's screenwriting.
Maybe it is. Cool.
Same.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, well, excuse me. Well, I do keep kind of a daily journal, and but I just always have. But for me, when I'm writing a poem, I don't always know what it's going to come out as. I just kind of start with an idea or an image, and then I start thinking of another image and kind of link image to image to image. Whereas, you know, when you're doing a story, it's more like the character's journey a little bit. With me, with poems anyway, it's kind of symbol to symbol to symbol, and kind of the what I'm writing about kind of emerges. And I think in that way, I think sometimes it does become a little bit psychological or whatever, because I do find myself, you know, writing about things like parenting or, you know, my parents, you know, death of my parents, you know, things like that. I never would have probably sat down and said, oh, I'm going to write a poem about my grandmother's funeral. I never would have sat down and thought that. But as I'm, you know, kind of going through this, you know, kind of random process I seem to use, it emerges. And then as I go, you know, but I kind of let myself go as I'm brainstorming, and I go back and, you know, edit later. And then I'll kind of start picking things up and go, oh. You know, and sometimes you can rub a couple symbols together and you get a little spark.
I've heard, I've taken some writing classes from incredible authors who have said, like, go towards the heat, go towards what's hot, you know, and I think that that's rarely something mundane.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's probably something that is a little psychological for us. I mean, it's like, where do we want to push it, like, you know, focus in with a lens, and it's probably going to end up being something, you know, that is in our own psychosis or psyche or whatever that is. It's gonna be different for everybody.
Yeah.
But I think that is like, you tend to do that.
You know, I think maybe you guys can respond to this, but I think one of the hard things, at least for me, one of the things I like, the reason that I like writing poetry and fiction is that I can distance myself from some of the from some of the personal pain. Whereas when you write nonfiction, I think you're a little bit closer.
Mm-hmm.
And I started my first novel. I started out writing it as a memoir, and then as I reread it, I just felt like it was just so painful and depressing, and I wasn't even sure I wanted to keep writing it, you know, because I was just digging this stuff up. And when I took a little distance and applied some irony and humor to it, then I could make it through. But so I admire that you're able to do that.
I feel almost the opposite. I feel like my poetry gets real personal,
Mm-hmm.
real fast, and it's tough for me to share it. I remember I wrote a lot of poetry in college, and I took some poetry writing classes, and I remember thinking, like, these people think I'm so dark because it all came out. It was not coming out in other parts of my life. It was all coming out in poetry, but maybe that's just my processing, way.
That's why I'm not a poet. Definitely not. Don't want to go in that direction. I've written a lot of creative nonfiction now. And I have found that I just, if I went to write, I don't know, I think my terminology is going to be off here, but if I went to write kind of straight memoir, no way. I don't think I could do it either. I was going to ask if you had, yeah, okay, yeah. Right.
Not interested.
Right. So now when I write creative nonfiction, I try to do, what I've done most recently is use the second person. I'm sorry, I like it. I think it's cool and fun, and you can do all kinds of amazing things in second person. So, anyway, so I work in second person, and it's like doesn't everybody know this? That teen female white heterosexual voice that tells you you're a piece of garbage. And so I write from that perspective. And it's pretty dark, but I gotta tell you, like, just being literary with that is so much fun.
Maybe it takes it out of your own head.
It's so much fun, yeah, and it makes it, right, exactly. And so I could never write, autobiography or just kind of straight up like, this is what happened. I think, it would be so gloomy. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I feel like there has to be, there doesn't have to be like positivity or light or a happy ending, but there's got to be some joy in there somewhere, in the beauty of the artistry or in some kind of surprise or something. There's got to be something akin to joy in the work.
Right. I agree.
So it can come from so many different places. It doesn't have to come from being pat or having a happy ending or any of that. Yeah, no, but yeah.
I don't know if you guys know who Zibby Owens is. She's she has these awards, and they're reader nominated, and my book won one last year for best book that made you cry. But then I got a runner-up for best book that made you laugh.
Awesome.
Which I was like, that's the best compliment. Like, because to me that's like that's life, great. Right? Like, I think laughter is the flip side of tears, and joy is the flip side of grief. And we cry when we laugh, and we laugh when we cry. I mean, that's, like, to me, there's not a lot of difference between those emotions. And I think especially when you're grieving, like, crazy, weird, like, hysterical things happen to you. That you're like, I can't believe this is happening, but it's happening, and you have to laugh, and so and vice versa. So I think there's something really beautiful about, like, having a little bit of everything in there, right? Like, it's, I mean, I've read very sad books, I've read very funny books. I really enjoy those too, but I do love, like, a book that can make me have all the emotions, or poems that can make me have all the emotions. And I can, like, hear a really profound statement, but then I will chuckle at the turn of phrase, you know, like I think that's really beautiful.
You know, it's that famous quotation by Charles Dickens, make them laugh, make them cry, make them wait.
Yeah. That's good. I don't know if I've ever heard that.
I haven't
I
either.
love that. That's because he wrote in Serial, didn't he?
Yes,
Yes,
he did.
yes.
He did. I make it so brilliant.
I know.
Yeah.
Do you want to do questions or?
Sure. Danny, do you have any questions? Or?
Come on.
Well, it's okay if you don't.
Yeah, it is.
Well, I'm curious, what was the hardest thing about writing this book, and what did you learn by doing it? I mean, did you, ever have, there's two of you, and I have another question for Terry that's more poetry related, but unless this one fits too. But I'm curious whether, like throughout the first draft in a revision or what, just so.
You mean emotionally or like?
Yeah. Well, when you were working on it, what was the hardest thing, and what do you think was the biggest thing you learned? And also, were you working on another novel?
Well, that's fun. I would actually say, having never written fiction before, and having the beginning of the characters in the storyline, and then like the first 30 pages just kind of like flooded out of me, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be so easy, and then it was so hard. So I would say the hardest part was once it wasn't easy anymore, just sticking with it. But I loved these characters so much, and I really believed in this story, and I just needed to get there. So I just but it was, and I had young kids and a job, and so I wasn't sitting and writing every day at all. So I would say, honestly, the most difficult part was just doing it. But so emotionally, I would say it was actually enjoyable because like I said, I loved spending time with these women. They're fun and they're funny and they're interesting, and even the dealing with the suicide stuff, like I said, was really healing in a lot of ways, and made me. I never knew my mother as a peer, and I obviously never will, but it made me kind of think about what that would have been like, and it would have been, it makes me sad that I never knew her as a peer, and she was a really fun. So the main character in this book who dies by suicide becomes clear as you're reading that it's probably undiagnosed bipolar disorder, which I believe my mother had. It was diagnosed at the very end of her life, but she would have these amazing, creative, manic, my birth. I was an only child, so my birthday parties were insane. She was an influencer before it was a thing. Everything was hand done, and everything cake. It was but that she loved it, and it was really magical to be her kid and to be at the center of that. But then also she'd go dark for days and sleep in the day, and I didn't know that was weird because I was an only child. So this character and these women helped me work through some of that stuff in a way that was much lighter and not I'm not in the fetal position crying about it. I'm more oh, this is how some people live, and this is how these women got through it. So
it's interesting. I really like the way you got into it.
Thank you.
It really worked.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah. And what about you?
I think I really, with this book, the story was kind of all at once, the same way that yours hit you. But I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. It's as if I'm teaching a class, because it always happens when I'm teaching a class in the middle of a sentence.
What was hardest?
Yes, I think the hardest thing was getting to the end. But I knew exactly where I was going, and I knew exactly how I wanted it to end too. And so it was just a question. It was a question of, it was I have a great idea. And now I've got to I've got to get to the ending of what I want. And I got there with support. I want to talk about that. I don't write alone. I write alone, but it's always with other people, fellow writers, talking about their work, talking about my work, reading. And then I finished, and I was in a group I was in, Writing by Writers draft program, which helped me finish the novel. And I wrote the end, and I was like, glorious! And I felt really good about the story. It was all on the page. For me, that's the hardest part. Once it's all on the page, I'm like, great, let's start writing. I'm good to go. But then my mentor, she very pleased with it and stuff, but she said, I think you need 20,000 more words. And I was like, all right. But I was confident enough by then that I did it and I saw what could be done about it. But it's just, and this book, this is what I was going to say, it taught me how to write a novel. It did. So, this is like, going to a teaching school for people, like going to
MFA.
Right, kind of.
Or if you will, finishing school.
That's good.
So this, I learned how to do it through this book. So anyway, I'm very, very grateful for that experience, for sure.
And do you, writing fiction and poetry, do you have times when you're just set aside to write poetry? Does it just, you wake up in the middle of the night and you're struck by something? What's sort of the process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I kind of have I guess I'd call it kind of a shotgun process, because I have a couple of novel projects at various stages of completion too. But I've always kind of, if I have an idea for a poem, I kind of drop everything and go with it. That's kind of been my my process. So yeah, sometimes at night, I won't write a poem at night, but I will. Maybe I'll have an idea from a dream, or maybe I'll have an idea when I'm going out for a walk, or I read a lot of poetry. Maybe I'll come across a symbol or a twist of words that sounds really interesting. I'll just keep thinking about it. But yeah, then I'll try to draft something. But this book kind of came out, even though I've kind of been working on these. These two novel projects for a while, but during the pandemic and everything, I found I had kind of a short attention span. I had a real hard time working on my longer projects. So I felt like, so I did write some flash fiction and a lot of poems during that time, and I realized that even though I hadn't gotten my novels done, I had quite a few poems that I'd written, so I decided to try to pull them together. But yeah, I don't. When I'm writing fiction, I can a lot of times write from an outline, or at least I rewrite the outline all the time. At least I can get up in the morning and I know what I'm going to write. When I'm writing a poem, I don't really know that.
I feel like I've learned that I have to leave my house. I think for one thing, I do my copywriting from my house, and that's easy. I can do, that's not hard for me. But I need a chunk of time where I'm completely devoted, and if I'm in my house, I will find any excuse to procrastinate. What needs to be organized so I don't have to sit down and open up my laptop and focus on. But it was. And that helped me because when I would go out, it'd be I had to make it worthwhile. Because I'd get somewhere and go sit there for 3, 4, or 5 hours, or sometimes I would even go spend the night at a cheap hotel, for a night or two. We call them business trips, because it was I need to go spend time with nothing to distract me, and that was helpful. But I would never have known that before I wrote this book. Now I know it, and I am working on a second book, and so I know to I don't even try to do it in my house, which is helpful. To know that.
I would love to know. So you're working on two.
I know I could never 2 at once.
2 novel projects.
That's impressive.
Do you all want to talk a little bit about what you're working on now?
Yeah,
I'm curious. Okay, tell us.
Yeah. So as I said, I kind of have a shotgun process. So basically because I write short fiction as I'm going along and poems too, but if I find myself stuck on one project, I'll just hop to the other one. That's kind of what I do. And so, yeah, one of my novels is in kind of probably about the fifth rewrite. And then one of them is still a rough draft. So that's kind of where those are. And then, you know, if I do, you know, I also have several like short fiction things that are in various stages of completion. But like I said, you know, when I've been going through, I'm kind of coming out of my short attention span. but I found that the nice thing about writing a poem is I can spend a week on it and feel like I've got it into kind of a form I'm happy with. Whereas a novel might take years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And stories for me usually take, you know, at least weeks, you know, to really get to the point where I like them. Or I have to put them aside for a while and come back or whatever, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine working on so many things at once. That's kind of amazing.
Well, I really only work on one thing at once. It's just like
But just move
I
into
just
another
jump
one.
around.
Yeah.
Parallel track.
It's either writing or laundry.
Yeah,
Exactly.
That's how I feel too.
Yeah.
That's why I have to leave the house.
I'm like, yeah. I'm like, I'm stuck. Oh, well, I better go find something else to do because.
I'm like about 30 pages into a second novel. It's pretty different. It's a little bit more domestic thriller, which is kind
That's what I thought.
of
Very
which is
cool.
kind of what I like to read. In fact, we met at a
Yeah,
mystery
right.
writers conference last year,
Right.
and I was already thinking about this book, but I hadn't really started it yet. But so what I'm doing now is I'm really giving myself grace to like go to retreats and go to I just went. This sounds crazy and unbelievable and like a total boondoggle, but I just went to a 8-day retreat in Chamonix, France, that was taught by Paula McLean, who wrote The Paris Wife and Circling the Sun, and Christina Baker Klein, who wrote Orphan Train and Piece of the World, and they've both written in it, and it was incredible, and I got so much done on that trip, and I'm going to the Kauai Writers Conference in November, and it's really hard to say yes to yourself on these things. I didn't forever. I didn't at all when I was writing this book. That's why it took me so long. And I'm learning to do it because I get so much more done. I get so much feedback. Like this was just like alone in my, in a cafe somewhere or like in a hotel room. Whereas, so, and it's been hard to learn to do that, but I'm really happy that I have, and it's been incredibly rewarding with the people I've met and how much further along I feel like I've gotten in my writing. So, I mean, I didn't go to school to write. I didn't get an MFA. Like this feels like my cobbling together of it, kind of. And I didn't really give myself permission until this book was published, and now I'm mad at myself. Now I'm like, why wasn't I doing this all along? This is really helpful, and I've met the most amazing people, and it's been really like part of the reward of having a book in the world has been like the people I've met and experiences I've had, and I had to learn to say yes to myself to do that, which is hard. I mean, I think it's hard for anybody. I think it's hard for women who are mothers and everything else and have a job.
100%.
I'm
100%.
really trying to do that, and it's been great. So that's something I just always want to share with people. Like, you always say, oh, someday I'll do that. Or, you know, I always said, someday I'll go to the Kauai Writers Conference. I knew about it for years. And then I went last year, and that's where I met Paul McLean and Christina Baker Klein. That's where I learned about this other retreat. I met I'm going to go back, and I probably have like 25 people that I know now there. And last year I knew nobody. So, I don't know. I just think like lean into yourself and what you're doing because it's worth it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I have a thriller in progress, which I just went from, oh, what is this? And then some feedback I got was, what is this? And I said, okay, so I have to make it into a thriller and a mystery now. Okay. So now I've kind of gone back and done that, and it was really, I gotta tell you, it was a slog. It was so much fun to get the first draft done. Because, you know, I just said, I'm like a person who's like, great, it's on the page, and now I can start writing. And then I I kind of let myself get distracted with worry and work, and didn't go back to it for quite a while. And then when I went back to it over the summer, I was like, wow, oh my God, how am I going to do this? It was just painful. Every word was just like a slog. But I made it through. And at this point, I can say that if anyone read this novel in progress, they would be able to say, this is a mystery. So now it is what it is identifiable, and at times interesting. But I have more work to do on it, but it's pretty fun. It would be more fun if I gave myself a break. Something I'm not very good at.
You mean a break from your work? Your other
A break from the mental anguish
from
that
being so
my
hard,
critic
you're
seems
editing your inner-
to.
Give yourself grace is what you mean.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
In a much more eloquent phrasing. Yes. that is what I think.
Yeah.
Stephanie, darling.
If you know, because this is like kind of an unfair question, what are some of your favorite parts of these books? What do you like best, or are glad you kept, or
Gotcha. So for these writers.
everybody?
Wait. Are you asking
I'm
me to
asking
say that about
everyone.
my own work or about his work and her work?
About your own.
Oh, okay.
What are your own pet favorite parts?
Okay.
If there are any.
Well, no, I do. I have a scene that I love that like flew out of me, and it's the three women are, they know that so the main character has a terribly traditional, uptight, boring funeral that was put on by her really uptight mother, and so they're like, that's not who she was, and so they are like, we're going to do our own for her, and then they decide to steal some ashes out of the mom's
hilarious.
hotel rooms. They have to like crack this whole plan, and it was really fun to write. And I didn't plan ahead. It just like started happening. I'm like, oh my God, I think we're stealing ashes now, which was a really fun thing to go through, like to like kind of be carried along by your own characters through this crazy scenario. I loved writing that, and I still love that scene. And a lot of people talk about that. I will say though that there's my secondary answer to that is when they have their own funerals that are towards the end. What I love about that is what I've heard from other people. Like I've had people be like, "I'm a better friend because of because of the things that they were able to say to each other that they just didn't say before." And it makes me want to like pick up the phone and call my best friend or call my sister or whatever. I had a woman come up to me and say at a book event that she's like, I've been estranged from my daughter for 10 years and I gave her your book and we're talking again. So like that to me, I mean, how it makes me feel to hear about that is even better. I mean, so one of it's like my experience and one of it's been like a reader experience that has been like incredible to me that I didn't know that could happen. That was really, yeah.
I think I don't know that I have a favorite part, but I have my favorite character is not the protagonist who gets on my nerves, but there's another character in the book, one of the protagonists' kind of only real friends. Her name is Nancy. And I wrote her, I didn't realize this, but I wrote her kind of like as just like, someone who skips school a lot, gets into trouble, and she does, but she also completely counters all those stereotypes that you have of like party girls or sluts or what have you. And I could write about her. Maybe she needs her own novel. But she's one of my favorite characters because she just, just because someone is a slut and a party girl doesn't mean that they don't have their shit together.
Absolutely.
And are interesting and are smart. And I know that sounds really elementary, but I didn't quite know that's what I was going to do with her when I started out. And I was like, no, I don't want to write these stereotype characters that men started, centuries ago. I'm not going to do that. And so I really enjoy Nancy a lot.
Well, as far as the poems go, there are some poems that I kind of like more than others, maybe. But I have to say, every time I finish a new poem, I think it's the best thing I've ever done.
100%.
Awesome.
And so,
Always.
and so it's like, this is great. I should send this to the New Yorker. And then, but then, I look at it a couple weeks later, I'm like, but I think one of the things that I find the most pleasing is that, I'm never sure what journals are going to take. And sometimes they surprise me. I get a letter back saying, "Oh, we just love this poem." And I'm like, "Well, that's not, the best poem in the package that I sent them." But it's still nice, so my my attitude towards some of the poems has changed just based on some of the feedback I've gotten sometimes. But it's I think it's different. It's different with poems than with fiction in a way.
Oh yeah. I was told by a mentor. I got an MFA. It was last century, but I got one.
Is it the late 1990s?
Yes.
That's what teenagers are calling the 90s. The late 1900s. That's
Oh
what
my God, that's just so awful.
I have teenagers. They call it the late 1900s. That's what they call it.
They have it. I have teenagers too. I haven't heard that
Oh yeah,
yet.
that's what they call it.
Oh, that's just awful.
Mhm.
Okay.
We say the late 1800s.
Right, we do. The late 1900s.
Yes.
That's when you got your MFA.
All right. That is when I got it.
Charles Dickens.
And he told me, because I wrote for the longest time just short standalone stuff, and I loved it, and I still do love it, but now I'm kind of into writing novels, and so apparently, but I remember my thesis director, who was wonderful, he said, I would bring him something, and I was like, this is beautiful. This is beautiful work. It's the best thing ever, And he just looked at me and he said, yes, you will always feel that way about what you're working on right
just
now.
Produced.
and I was like, oh, really? Oh,
Too much reality.
Kind of what happens. And then a few things. I thinking of two essays I wrote long ago, neither of which got published, but I, wrote them to pieces. Just thought they were brilliant at the time, and they're 15, 20 years old now. And I think in the last couple of years, I just kind of pulled them up, and I remembered clearly thinking how great they were. And I was like, oh, no. I was shocked at my own. They weren't horrible or anything, but they needed work. They weren't, and they had lovely, lovely moments, but they were not what I thought they were when I was in the thick of it. Definitely not. Oh.
I have a question from someone on our online audience, and this can probably be our last question if that's all right.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So this is from Mary Ladd, who says, "What book for each of you changed your life?" If you have to choose just one.
Why don't I write this down before I
have a few, but I'm gonna. I was running through the airport. I don't know, 12 years ago, something like that. And I was like, I don't have anything to read. And so I went to the airport bookstore, and there was a book that just caught my eye. It was the cover of it, caught my eye. And I bought it. It was a memoir. And I tore through that book, and I loved it so much. It's Laura Munson's book, This Is Not the Story You Think It Is. And I loved it so much that I ended up doing a deep dive on her. You know how you do that when you're really into a book? And I found out she had a writing retreat. And once I had the beginning of this book, I went on her writing retreat, and she read, and I, paid a little extra to have a one-on-one with her. And she read the beginning of this book, and she said, this is going to be published, and I will be at your book signing. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? I mean, I almost passed out. I was like, I don't know what's happening. And she was at my book signing last summer here in San Francisco. She flew out for it. And she's become a mentor and a dear friend of mine. But I literally just texted her recently, what if I had never picked up that book in the airport? Because I don't. There was times when I'm like, Laura Munson believes in this book, so I have to stick with this book because I thought. I mean, I love her writing so much and still do. Anyway, so that's a kind of it's a different answer maybe, but I really do think it changed my life, and I tell her that, and I it's like those moments in your life where like it's like sliding doors, you know, like it could have gone one way and it went this way, and you know, here I am. So that's what I said.
I love that because it's so like this book actually changed what I did.
Yeah, it really did.
And for me, the books have just changed. It's just been those wonderful epiphanies of reading a book. I don't know if I like did anything. I wished I could write like that.
Yeah.
But the book, yeah. I guess the books that occur to me off the top of my head that helped me understand like what writers could do was I'm sorry, these are kind of like classics. I apologize, but House of Mirth by Edith Wharton just leveled me. So sad. And Toni Morrison's A Mercy. This little book, a littler book that she wrote, historical, 100% historical fiction. Just the most, it just ripped my heart out, but like everything, right? But it was just the joy in the craft. You could just feel it, the joy in the writing on the page, every step of the way. So you had these horrible, tragic situations, but it was so gorgeous. Yeah, it's a great book. It's one of my favorites. But I guess they changed me. I don't know. They made me become a person in chronic awe.
Yeah, well, for me, it's probably going to sound a little bit arcane, but when I was in high school, my English classes tended to ruin everything we read.
They still do.
Yeah, they still do.
So I always read a lot when I was a kid, you know, but I read, you know, science fiction, I read cowboy books, you know, I read anything. And most of my science education was with, or most of my education was with classic comics. And so, but then when I got to college and I started, you know, reading, you know, rereading some of these, or you're reading, you know, Hemingway and Forster and you know, Faulkner and you know, Scott Fitzgerald and all that. I was like, wow. But one of the most interesting things for me was that one of the books we read in high school was Great Expectations, and I hated it. It was just, I hated it so much, you know, because we'd have quizzes every Friday, and you know, and it was just like, you know, it took us like, you know, 3 or 4 months to read it, and it was just, you know, we had to, you know, read it out loud, and oh God. But then when I read it in college, it was like, wow, this is an amazing book. It was one of the most amazing books I'd ever read.
Yeah.
And I think that's what kind of got me into, you know, going ahead and being an English major, going to graduate school. And I eventually, you know, went to, graduate school, got a PhD in Victorian literature. So I think that kind of got me started in, you know, realizing that they weren't all as horrible as I believe they were.
Yay, great.
Thank you so much for having
much.
us. Putting this together. It's been great.
Oh, here, I'll come back into my official role here. Can we give one more hand for JJ Elliott? What a delight to hear you all talk about your work and talk to one another about your work. I loved hearing the connections between all of them, and I'm so grateful to you all for joining us here and also online. Thank you so much. Usually in my official capacity, I remind you that we do have books available from all 3 of our authors at the front register. If you would like to take a look at them, and I'm sure they'd be happy to sign them for you. And I will also say, we have other books too.
I'm going shopping.
I have a stack off there. There's a stack there. I'm gonna go get more.
The holidays are closely in your
They are. They really are.
But anyway, I'm just very glad to have all 3 of you here. Thank you so much. We will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.